Hi, everyone. Happy Rare Disease Day. My name's Cheryl Herbert. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the National Organization for Rare Disorders. I'm also a rare teen mom. And tonight, NORD, in partnership with the Usher Syndrome Society and Usher Syndrome Coalition, is really excited to bring you a special webinar on for parents of teens that are living with rare diseases. And we have somebody incredibly dynamic that's going to be leading this session for us tonight. Her name is Rebecca Alexandra. And Rebecca is an author, a psychotherapist, a disability rights advocate. She's an athlete. She's a TED Talk presenter. And when I met Rebecca last year and learned of her story, what I learned about her that really stopped me in my tracks was, in addition to all those amazing things I just listed off, I learned that Rebecca, who has Usher syndrome, started losing her vision and her hearing as a child. And she was told that she would likely be completely blind by the age of 30. And I stopped and thought, this is somebody who can help our community, who comes from a lens of a child herself, was once a child herself with a rare disease, comes with the lens as an adult now living with a rare disease, and somebody who has an incredible wealth of knowledge and expertise in mental health that can really help our community. So she is here with us tonight. We're thrilled to have her, and I'd like to introduce you, Rebecca Alexandra.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I just wanted to give you all some information about the interpreter, Nancy, who's on this webinar tonight. And so if you'd like to be able to turn on the ASL interpreter, if you look on the bottom panel of your screen, you'll see that it says interpretation. So if you click on that, you'll be able to turn ASL interpreter on or off. So if you see her twice, you're able to X out of one of them, and then she should be there on your screen. Also, we have closed captioning, so you can see that. That's a little easier. I think people maybe are more familiar with that, but it's right in the center on the panel. It says CC, and you can turn that on. And we actually have captioning in several languages, Spanish, and some others, so you can also choose which language you would like to have your closed captioning in. I'm going to give you just a moment here to be able to do that. Okay. So I want to take a moment as you're setting up and getting situated, checking your volume and telling everyone else around you to settle down and quiet so that you can focus. I want to give just a very quick special thanks to absolutely to NORD for setting this up. It's a very special day to have Rare Disease Day. As we know, the 29th of February comes 4 times or every 4 years. And so it's really special that we can all be here together. Nancy O'Donnell, I want to thank very much for interpreting. She's a wonderful interpreter, and I'm just very grateful that she can join us tonight to be here. So first and foremost, I want you to try putting your phone away. Try putting anything that is around you that's a distraction. I know that we're all coming in after a long day, or maybe we are still eating, we're doing a few things at once, and it's very difficult for us to be fully present for anything in our lives, particularly when you're a person who has rare disease in your life, because we are all multitasking and doing many, many things. So just give yourself a moment to really be fully present if you can. Give yourself that opportunity to really be here with all of us. And I want to be sure to welcome all of you to the club that nobody ever wanted to be a part of. So welcome. I don't think any of us ever signed up for the Rare Disease Club, and yet here we are. And thank goodness for all of us, because it's so important to know that there are other people around the country and the world who are also living and managing as best as they can with rare disease. So tonight is particularly different and special, I think, because we're focusing on parents, we're focusing on caregivers. We're constantly focused on our teens, on our kids, and how to help them. And I don't think there's any more challenging, rewarding, and meaningful job than being a parent. And yet I wouldn't wish it on anyone, which is to say that I don't have children. I make that very clear because people often ask me if I have children of my own. So I do not have children, but what I can tell you is that I do work very closely with teens and with families. And one of the primary things that I find is that when you're dealing with rare disease, it's not just the person or the teen or the child in the family with the rare disease. Everybody is affected in some way, but we don't focus on everybody. We focus on that one person, the child, the teen that has the rare disease. And because of that, it means that oftentimes we lose sight of ourselves. We have this constant evolvement and changing of our identities and of our priorities, and figuring out, what we need to do for ourselves. But more importantly, oftentimes when we have a teenager with a rare disease, we have a tendency to make that person or family the identified patient, of course, because let's be honest, they are. They're the ones that have they certainly draw the most anxiety and uncertainty for us. But really, when we're dealing with a rare disease, everybody plays a role in how we manage and navigate rare disease. And because there also are so many different types of rare diseases, it's difficult for me to go into all of the specific circumstances that each of us face. But I do want to ask you, just for this evening, really to try to focus on your role, on you as a caregiver, as a parent, and what that means, what your identity is, how your identity has shifted, how it's changed, how you see yourself, how you believe other people see you. And because I think that that's something that we completely lose sight of. I would guess that most people hopped on here tonight thinking they were going to get all the tools to be able to best help their children. And yes, I will give you tools. But remember that our children are direct sort of reflections of us. And so when we're dealing with rare disease, what's so important is for us to be able to put our masks on first and then help them. And when we don't, what happens is that there's a trickle-down effect of how a child or a teenager learns how to take care of themselves, learns how to advocate, learns how to speak their needs, learns whether they're capable or incapable. They learn how to manage their anxiety or their stress, or they don't learn how. And so I think it's so important for us to remember that not only are we parents, but you're also the people who are mirrors, and you're the ones who are the guiding light oftentimes, that when you are not dealing with your own mental health and well-being and hoping to be able to focus solely on the mental health and well-being of your child or your teenager, that it gets a little murky, because it means that we're just simply channeling our anxiety, our stress, our everything into our child, rather than being able to take a step back and address what it is that we are experiencing or feeling, how we're handling things. So I want to give you some examples of some cases that I have, because I think sometimes we can hear our own stories or we can relate. There's catharsis in knowing about other people's experiences. I have a family that I work with, and the daughter has a rare disease. And one of the things that has been clear from early on is that they're very, very concerned about her being able to get the best education that she deserves, to be able to have the accessibility, to be able to make sure that everybody is well informed about what her needs are, which makes sense, because there's a lot of accommodating, and their daughter is oftentimes in and out of the hospital. But what has also happened is that they do everything for her, and that she actually knows that she's the identified patient and couldn't tell you what the services are or the skills. She's now 16, but doesn't really know the names of all of these services and the people, or how you get to these people to help her. And I completely understand why her parents have been the ones taking care of all those things, because she's got enough on her plate just dealing with the rare disease. But the difficulty is that the hope is that in time, maybe the child, your teen, will be able to leave your home. And assuming that they are leaving your home and they go on to be adults, how do you want to empower them? And when we do so much for our kids, understandably, there are going to be days where they're not able to do some things, and the next day they are able to do some things, and it can be dependent on any given day and the circumstances. But we also want to be able to instill in our children a sense of agency, a sense of ability to speak their needs, to self-advocate. And so when you reach out to, let's say, school or any type of services, I always think it's important to let your children know what you're doing, who you're reaching out to, and why, and how it's sort of set up. Educate them about the system, not just doing it for them, because when we do it for them, it means that we're only actually fueling our anxiety, we're enabling our teen, and we're not creating the foundation for confidence. Because having a rare disease, I think it's interesting, many of us feel this sense of fragility or vulnerability or weakness. And yet the most resilient people I know are the people who are on this webinar this evening. That being physically compromised because of a rare disease does not mean that you are not resilient. And I would argue that you are far more resilient than all of the able-bodied families and teens that I work with. So I hope that you can really take that in. But I want to give you another example of a family I work with, and the son is now 37 years old, and was raised in a family where, when he was struggling at times, he has a hearing loss based on his rare disease. And when he struggled, the parents just wanted to get him through that next step. And so they even hired people to do his papers at times in high school. And at 37 years old, he is now really struggling socially. He's able to get a job for a car rental place, but he really sort of struggles in learning how to self-advocate, even being able to write, resume, and all of this is just giving you kind of the worst case scenario, and just how important it is for you to really incorporate your teen into all of the things that you do to be able to advocate on their behalf, so that as they continue, or at times when you're not there, they will know what to do. They won't have to just have you on speed dial, call my mom, call my dad, call whoever, they handle this. I think that we oftentimes don't want our children to be any more burdened than they already are with having a rare disease. We have so much guilt, we have so much grief, we have so many emotions. And rather than being able to identify those and feel those feelings and the emotions, we oftentimes channel them in different ways that often doesn't empower our teen. It actually maybe disempowers them. And it's just something that's important to be aware of. I think that oftentimes when we deal with rare diseases that are progressive, so I have Usher syndrome, which is the leading genetic cause of deafblindness. So I'm cochlear implanted on both sides. I was cochlear implanted on my left side in 2017 and my right side in 2013. And so progressively, my hearing loss got to the point where I wore hearing aids, and I now have just my central most vision. So I'm actually looking at the screen right now. I can't see Nancy, the interpreter. I can't see my face. I can just sort of see here, but I scan to be able to get the whole picture. And, one of the things that I remember when I was growing up is that particularly my mom would oftentimes reach out to schools, or she was actively involved with Foundation Fighting Blindness. My dad was as well. And she would expose me to these things. And I remember feeling awkward and feeling weird and not really knowing what to make of it. And I'm so glad that she did, that she exposed me to these things. Even at a time before I even knew what vision loss meant. I didn't really understand what hearing loss really meant. I had what was known as a cookie bite of hearing loss. So I cocked my ear towards one side because my left ear was my better ear. But I remember not that long after my diagnosis with the vision part of my condition, that we went to a Foundation Fighting Blindness conference. And there happened to be just a small group of kids that they had, must have been about 15 at the time, that all had retinitis pigmentosa, which is the vision part of what I have. And that was the first time that I'd met any other kids who had what I had. And even just at the time, all I knew was that I tripped over the dogs if they were in the way, or the coffee table, or if the dishwasher was open, or if somebody left a cabinet open. At night, I didn't see well, and I needed to grab someone's arm if I went to the movie theater. But that was where I was at that time. And I was able to relate to other kids who were in a similar place. At that time, it would not have been helpful to me to be able to talk about or think about or constantly be exposed to, this is what you're going to look like or what your life is going to be like when you're an adult. First of all, we had no idea. I mean, you can be given a diagnosis, but we also don't know exactly what our trajectory is going to look like. And developmentally, particularly for children and teenagers, we have to think about where they are developmentally. So all of these worries and concerns that you have oftentimes get projected onto a teenager, not purposely, because you're thinking about their future and you want them to think about their future. But it's so important for us to be present and to be able to deal with the here and now and what we're dealing with in the here and now. Certainly there are things you can do to prepare yourself for, with having assistive technology or being able to have some semblance of understanding of what the manifestation is of a condition. But it really is so important for us to be able to be present for where you are and what you're experiencing right now. So I have another screen up here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the experience of being a parent, of being a caregiver, and having a teenager with a rare disease. And I want you to ask yourself, what has that experience been like for you? I can only imagine the overwhelm, the trauma, all of that. But really, what perspective has it brought to your life? What anxiety do you feel? In what ways do you maybe sometimes get in your own way of being able to get the type of support that you need? Are you afraid of asking for help, or do you ask for help? In what ways are you really feeling strong about how you take care not only of yourself, but also of your teen? Because these are questions that we oftentimes don't ask ourselves. We're just constantly going and just trying to do whatever the next thing is. And it oftentimes feels just like a rat race, a never-ending exhaustion. And so it is important to be able to slow down. One of the skills that I really encourage people to use is mindfulness. We hear so much about mindfulness. And when I ask parents sometimes, well, okay, so I have a family I work with, and their teen has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS, and a very, very challenging form of EDS. And everything is poured into her care, academically, physical therapy, stem cell research, doing stem cell transplants. I mean, you name it, they have done so many things to support her. And she has a tremendous amount of guilt about it, because she knows how much her family has really kind of gone above and beyond to support her, and how exhausted they are. And she feels a sense of kind of responsibility for them, knowing that she obviously can't control and didn't ask for EDS. But she knows that it's where a lot of the stress in her family comes from. And so I encourage them as a family to, practice mindfulness. And the mom said, I don't have time for mindfulness. Like Ellie has, or, has all these things that, she can do to help herself, but I don't have time. Like, this is, I've given all the tools that I can. And so I say, well, what if you were to practice it together? What if you were to engage in that mindfulness exercise together? Because one of the most important things we can also do as parents is we teach co-regulation. We teach our teenagers, or we teach our kids how to be able to regulate not only their emotions, but their breathing, be able to stay present. And if it's something you need to practice and you don't even have the time, is it something that you could do with your teen? Now, most teens are like, oh, leave me alone, I don't want to talk about it. And that may be where they are. If you are a family who likes to use humor, which I oftentimes think humor is one of the most important things that we can have, particularly when you live with a rare disease. But you could say, listen, like, just go with me here for 5 minutes. I need you to do this with me. And we can make it sort of silly, or we can make it, fun or funny or just ridiculous. Don't be afraid to kind of be, vulnerable and be someone who also, can be in that position of needing support or help. So I think one of the biggest pieces here, and I'm just pulling up one of my tools here, is really about an issue that I think we don't talk a lot about, and that is the grief and loss that comes with rare disease. And it's not for the sake of morbidity or mortality. You may have, my condition isn't causing me to lose my life, but it does cause me to have to be more and more removed from the life that I knew, from the way that I was raised. In my family, I learned sign language later when I was in college. So when I'm home, in general, my preferred state is with my ears off, is to be completely deaf. And so I'm not able to communicate with my family easily. I have to come into their world and put my ears on. And so there's a lot of grief and loss that comes with having a rare disease, whether it's the, grief and loss around what you anticipated your teenager's life would be like, or what it was that you thought maybe he or she or they would be able to do at a certain age. Being able to identify that grief and loss, because grief and loss is such a part of life, and we oftentimes refer to it or think about it in terms of death, losing a loved one, losing a pet, losing, a close friend or something. And it actually has it runs the gamut. We experience grief and loss so consistently, and particularly when you deal with rare disease, grief and loss is in the forefront. It's at the forefront of so much of what our lives are about. And I think the difficulty is that we're exposed to grief and loss with our teens and ourselves at a much earlier age than most people are. But it is very much a part of life, and it's something that we have to develop a relationship with. I remember a time not that long ago when I was at the airport and I was using my cane. Coming to terms with having to use my cane meant that my identity had to change. I was out in the world as someone who was seen and perceived as fully able-bodied, and gradually had to come to terms with being out in the world as someone who was seen and perceived as having a disability, of using a cane. The irony of being a psychotherapist and being on the street and using a cane is that I'm likely the last person anybody would think to turn to ask for help, right? So I remember being in the airport and I was making my way. It was an airport I was not particularly familiar with, but I was very keenly aware of what I could no longer see, of what I used to be able to see, and really just noticing that my life is very different. My vision is very different than it was before, and even than I ever imagined it would be. And that this is not it. That where I am now is I still am on this trajectory, and there's no treatment or for what I have. In that moment, I was so overcome by the fact that I was 12 years old when I was in this doctor's office in San Francisco, California. My parents were given this diagnosis, retinitis pigmentosa, the vision part of what I have. And here I was, you know, I'm now 45. Here I was in my 40s, and I was living that diagnosis. I was actually now, you know, where had all the time gone? Where had all of that time from that original diagnosis to this very place gone? And I was just overwhelmed and overcome with emotion. And I just felt, you know, a flooding of tears come to me. But I needed to get to my gate, and I didn't want to attract, you know, sort of pity and sign language. This is like, I pity you. I didn't want to elicit that in other people, and I needed to get to my gate. And so in that moment, rather than, you know, breaking down and crying, and trust me, I would not have a problem doing that. I've certainly done it many times here in New York City. But I said, I see you, grief. I see you. And I am going to hold you safe, somewhere safe, and be able to give you the time that you deserve later. And I was able to sort of create that compartmentalizing of that grief that I was very much aware of and feeling and connected to. And yet it also was not a time where I felt comfortable really breaking down and getting into it. And just even being able to acknowledge that grief, being able to be tender with myself. Oftentimes when you deal with rare disease, we can't control what we have or what our teens have. And so we take it out on ourselves. We think that if only I had done, you know, all of these different things, and that life would be different. We have no ability to sort of control what's happening. And so seemingly, if we could just control ourselves, we wouldn't be in this situation. And of course, when we do that, it's loaded with self-judgment, with shame, with so many feelings that that are not helpful to us. And being able to practice self-compassion, we hear about it all the time. I know that it used to make me roll my eyes because it's like, oh, here we go, self-compassion again. And yet I somehow realized that I actually had no other choice, because if I can't be compassionate to myself, then how was I going to be able to advocate for myself? How was I going to be able to have relationships with other people? And I think that that's a really important piece. You know, one of the other common themes I find with caregivers of teens, whether we're aware of it or not, I don't know how many of you are, you know, constantly just going and doing. I mean, this may not even be your only child, maybe it is, but you have so many things you have to do. You have a job, you have all of these responsibilities, and everything is on your shoulders. And you start to not really like yourself very much, because you find yourself being snippy, you find yourself being moody, you find yourself not wanting to hear about whatever is going on in anybody else's life. First of all, you don't have time for it. Second of all, your compassion, empathy is like out the window. Like, I got so much stuff going on. You think your stuff is bad? It disconnects us from the world. But more importantly, it creates tremendous resentment in us. And I think that resentment is one of the hardest emotions that I have had to really recognize in myself. Times when I have been engaged in conversations or on a phone call, or finding myself being very short with people. And I realize, oh, what is that? That doesn't feel like me. And it doesn't feel good. Certainly you don't hang up a call or leave someone and ever feel good when you operate from a place of resentment. And so being able to recognize that we feel resentful. And I remember for me, the feeling resentful is I'm a helper by nature, which is ironic because, not only am I in a helping profession and so many people rely on me for mental health, but I also need to rely on other people. But interdependence is such an important part of what we all must learn and teach our, teens, is that yes, they need you more than anything, but you need them too. And you may need them to be able to do certain things for themselves. And it's okay to, treat your teen with a rare disease like they are capable and able, because they are. And some days, again, it may not be as capable and able because of the, iatrogenic side effects of taking a medication or whatever the case may be. But you should never lose that sense of autonomy and agency that your teen has, no matter what the circumstances are. I think that being able to recognize the way in which resentment plays out in your life. I remember, mom was saying to me that she does absolutely everything. Her husband's always working. He's never around. She's in charge of the kids. He wouldn't even be able to tell, she wouldn't even be able to tell him how to go, take their child to Columbia to get her infusions and whatever. And I said, well, have you ever asked him to? And she said, it's not even worth it. I wouldn't even waste my time. And so we also take on this role sometimes of like, we are the only person who can do this, that nobody else is going to get this done as efficiently or know all the information as much as we do. And it's not that we don't want help. It's that sometimes somebody else offers to help, but unless they do it exactly the way that we do things, we don't want your help. And yet, nobody is going to do anything exactly the way that you do it. And so is that something, given the situation, that you're willing to relinquish? You're willing to have somebody do whatever that, part of your role is to help support you, to give you some respite, to be able to help, pick up some of the slack? Or are you going to be, as glued to the way that you do things and everything having to be within your control? Read, everything is not in your control, so I'm trying to create as much control as I can, and therefore harbor resentment. How do you manage your relationships with a spouse or a loved one who maybe doesn't see the rare disease the way that you do? What are your opinions? Are they different? Is someone in denial? In the stages of grief and loss, particularly with rare disease, most of us are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and, the 5 stages of death and dying. And actually, grief and loss and the stages with rare disease is a bit different, because it's not just, the denial and the anger and the bargaining and the depression and the acceptance. There's a reconfiguring, there's a changing of identities, there's a having to adjust to the ever evolving changes and needs that you go through, and having to address what your life looks like, what you're able to do, what is possible. We have a tendency to ruminate on what we used to be able to do instead of focusing on the things that we can do now. And so I have so many people who come in and tell me about all of the things that they were able to do. And I hear the light and the excitement and all of the memories that they have. And I also hear that desire in them to want to be able to hold on to that time, to almost like they wish they could go back and be grateful at the time for what they now are so grateful for. And I don't know that there's a difference. The fact that you're able to appreciate that now as much as you do, and let yourself feel that, let yourself experience that and have those wonderful memories, and also grieve that so that you can show up for what your present situation is now. I think what's difficult sometimes too with teens is that there's a lack of that kind of mind-body awareness. And so sometimes you may see changes in your teen before they do. You may see them shutting down, or you may see them really struggling socially. And you want to do everything in your power to support them. And the hard thing is that we also have to accept where they are. Now, that doesn't mean just ignore them and let them just, kind of go about things the way that they, they want to. But I think that because we live in such a time and place now of things all being online, isolation is even compounded by just the very circumstances of the time and place we live in. And so I do think that it's important to be able to connect with other families. It's important to be able to not force your teen to connect with, other people who have what they have, but just let them know that there are resources, let them know that there are other families, or even, let them know that you've met a parent or a mom with, a child who has, a similar thing, and being able to make this sort of a part of your everyday life and not just something that is so scary and that we have to hide and not talk about. So I'm just pulling this up here. So one of the other things that I find is helpful, and I have to apologize because I'm so used to being on an interactive screen that it feels very strange to speak to myself and not have that engagement. I'm very much someone who likes to be able to have the back and forth. So thank you for putting up with that. But in terms of grief and loss, being able to share your feelings with a loved one, with a therapist, with a support group, with your spouse, with someone who you really trust is so important. I think that people oftentimes will say things with the best of intentions, like they want to fix things or they want to give us advice, they have opinions. And usually what we need more than anything is we just need someone to listen. We just need someone to say, I can't even imagine. Or just to be able to be that sounding board that we can share these things with, that we can cry to, and be able to hold that space with us and for us. Just be there with us. Because the reality is that there really is nothing that anybody can say or do. I mean, if it comes to finding a carpool or somebody to help with something else, then that's one thing. But when it comes to your emotions, really the most important thing you can do is to try to allow yourself to go through that range. And it's very difficult because the reality is that most of us were not raised in families ourselves where emotions were spoken about openly, or if they were, they certainly were not regulated well. So it was all over the place. And having emotions is about as human of an experience as it comes. So being able to learn how to recognize your emotions and being able to recognize, what it is that you're feeling and acknowledge it, not have to sort of run away from it or push it down is so important. I encourage people to find, social support when it comes to grief and loss. Definitely the practicing breathing and mindfulness. I meditated before I came on here, which I know how many of us roll our eyes when we hear meditation. But I meditate every day for 5 minutes. Let's be clear. I don't have all my chakras aligned and my third eye isn't, aligned with my legs. But it's a way that I'm able to bring myself to the present, because by nature, I live with a tremendous sense of urgency. There's an urgency of wanting to do everything I can, as much as I can, while I still have the vision that I have. And I wish that wasn't the case. But that is who I am. That's a part of how I feel, and it's something I contend with every day. And rather than continuing to spiral down the rabbit hole, I try to give myself that time to just sit with the anxiety and to connect my breathing to my body, because that, I think, is one major piece that most of us struggle with, is being able to recognize how important being able to have a connection to our breath contributes to our ability to feel a sense of calm or peace, even when things around us are completely chaotic. Exercise is a huge one. I know that this is for caregivers. I know that may range for everyone in terms of what they're able to do, but being able to take that time for for yourself. And people say, oh, I absolutely don't have time. I completely understand that. And it doesn't have to be anything major. You could be, you know, I certainly have had parents who are in the hospital room with their child doing leg lifts and just doing something to make themselves feel, and you know, they'll engage their teen and the teen will be counting their reps, you know. And there's a way to kind of make this as a, like, we're all in this, we are all experiencing this together, and able to recognize all of our needs. It's okay to have needs, even though your child or your teen may be seemingly more significant or severe than your own. So there's a couple of forms or worksheets that we're going to send out to you after this that I really like to use. One of them is the STOP technique, which I'm going to teach you now. And the other one is self-advocacy and self-advocacy skills, and being able to really empower your child and being able to advocate for themselves. But before I move on to that, I wanted to also just mention, in terms of grief and loss, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves routinely, what adjustments do I need to make to my life? What are some of the things that I've been holding on to that I have not been willing to either adjust or change or let go of, that are no longer serving me? Because I think sometimes we don't even realize the things that we're hanging on to, or we're trying to, you know, really keep in sort of our control, that is not actually serving us anymore. And the other question is, what is holding you back from being able to be present? What are the things that are keeping you from being able to be just even with your kid, and with the uncertainty and all of the feelings and emotions that come with, you know, living with rare disease in your life? But so the STOP technique is a technique that I oftentimes encourage people to do who struggle with impulsivity and compulsivity. The urgency that so many of us feel with rare disease is that things need to happen now. Most of us, or many of us, have been in experiences where it may have been life or death, or it may have been something came on, a seizure, anything that was just so sudden and seemingly out of nowhere, that we have this response of just like, I gotta move, I gotta go, I gotta act. And then that gets incorporated into the rest of our lives. We also live in an overly saturated technological time. So our phones are constantly buzzing. The part of the difficulty of being a psychotherapist is that at the end of the day, I may have 30 new text messages, and just because I've been back to back, I haven't been able to check all of them. And then of course I need to be able to disconnect. And so I oftentimes will say to someone, listen, if you've reached out to me and I didn't respond, you know, feel free to just ping me and put it at the top of my text messages, you know, the next day, if you need a response from me. And it's not an intentional ignoring, it's just having, you know, a lot to do in any given day. But sometimes, because we're trying to just stay on top of things and we can never stay afloat or keep our head above water, somebody sends us something and then we respond. And there's someone I work with, and she told me that she realized something about herself that she really doesn't like. And that is that she found herself telling a lot of white lies about when anybody would invite her to do something or ask her about. She just found that, like, it was easier just to make excuses or to have reasons. And she even found herself using rare disease as like her excuse. And that's okay. That's okay. Just recognize that, all right, this is something, like, it's okay that your teen has a rare disease and you are absolutely exhausted. And so, no, you can't go to girls' night with your, you know, mom friends, or that you need that time on your own. Or maybe you can show up for mom's night and realize that, like, yeah, this is actually what I needed. You don't have to let the guilt just, you know, become so insurmountable that you have to somehow punish yourself and stay home. But what she said was that when people ask her to do things, she would white lie because she didn't want to disappoint them. But she also felt like she didn't have the bandwidth. She was so tired. And so she would just oftentimes respond right away with some, kind of BS excuse. And I said to her, well, and we sort of laughed about, well, where do you come up with these things? Like, oh, I have to take this kid to this and whatever. They were just always made up excuses. And I said, well, why do you need an excuse? I mean, it sounds like you got enough on your plate that you don't even need to excuse your not being able to do something. You could be watching paint dry, and that's enough for you to not be available. But she said that this urgency she feels to not want to disappoint people, to want to be on top of her texts and everything, was actually causing her to do things and say things and that were not authentic to who she is. And so I said, all right, well, let's practice the stop technique. And this is a worksheet that we have for all of you that I encourage everyone to be able to employ. But so the stop technique is this, and it's a dialectical behavioral therapy skill that I really, really like. And I'm a big proponent of DBT, particularly for teens. For everyone, I think everyone could benefit from DBT, but I think teens are definitely a good population for DBT. But so the S in stop is stop. So you get a text message or you get something that triggers or, a response in you that makes you feel like a reaction. I need to react. I need to respond. I have to do this without even a moment's notice of thinking, without taking a beat. And oftentimes when we do that, we're acting out of a primary emotion like anger, resentment, fear, annoyance, whatever it is. So S is for stop. Whatever it is that is sort of setting you off, stop, take a beat. Okay, stop. T is for take a step back. So maybe it's doing 15 jumping jacks, maybe it's washing your face with ice cold water, maybe it's screaming into a pillow, maybe it's changing your environment, walking into the other room, going outside, walking around the block, taking your dog out, whatever it is, but you are just changing the environment, the headspace, the focus that can become all consuming. The O is for observe. Observe what comes up for you physically. I'm feeling a tightness in my chest. I'm feeling a nausea in my gut. I'm feeling heat rise from my neck into my cheeks. Whatever the physical symptoms are, I'm clenching my fists. And also observe what you're feeling emotionally. Emotionally, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling afraid of disappointing people. Just acknowledge what is coming up for you. And the P is for proceed mindfully. And so it's basically just slowing down that process, because oftentimes so much of our life and our day becomes so chaotic and hectic and moving and going. And that's actually part of how we deal with these underlying feelings of things being so completely out of our control, that seemingly if I'm just on top of all of these other things, that will make up for this very real experience I have of having life be completely out of my control. So I know that I don't have a whole lot of time here. So I wanted to give you some of the self-advocacy skills too. And I'm curious to know what self-advocacy sort of means to you, what it looks like, what it feels like. I think that self-advocacy skills it's something that we all need to learn. And being able to self-advocate when you have a disability or a rare disease is particularly important, because oftentimes you may absorb or have that trickle-down effect of your parents and the way that, caregivers and the way that they handle their own feelings or emotions. Like if they say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to bug you. What would happen if you didn't have to apologize? What would happen if you were able to just speak your needs? I think one of the most important things that I learned when I was in college, there was a director of deaf and hard of hearing student services, and her name was Joni Smith. And she taught me that, the needs and the accommodations that I needed were not privileges. They were actually rights. And it was very difficult for me to wrap my head around that, because I always felt like having a disability and being needing to have whatever the accommodations were that I needed were a burden. And I had proof of that, because I had professors who made me feel that way. And what I learned is that as soon as someone said no to me, it was like, oh, I love it. I love it. as soon as they said no, that only fueled my fire to not to get angry, but to educate and to say, this is, oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't asking as something that's optional. I'm letting you know that this is actually a requirement. So one of the most important things that we can do in teaching our teens is being able to practice positive self-talk. It is so hard to be a teen and have any positive self-talk. And don't get me into technology and social media. I think it is, I know, wonderful for a lot of things, but I think it is the bane of existence for kids and their mental health. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to stick to that. So especially when you're dealing with rare disease, I think it's great that you can connect with other people who have rare disease, but I think that positive self-talk is so, so, so important in recognizing your value and your worth, and being able to see your caregivers, your parents, reflect and know your value and worth, and demonstrate, you being able to demonstrate for them what that looks like is so important. Not from a place of pity, but from a place of like, you're a badass, you know, like you've got this. And that's the type of positive psychology that I generally work from. Asking for help when you need it. That's a really important piece. Being able to recognize when asking for help for me formerly was like, if I ask for help, it would mean that I'm saying I'm incapable. And in fact, it isn't that I was incapable. I mean, maybe I was incapable of being able to read font that was that small. But what I realized in time was that in asking other people for help, I was actually engendering in them the feelings of being needed, letting them know that they matter. And I think that we all, more than anything in this world and in this lifetime, want to know that we matter, that we're needed. So when you self-advocate, you ask for help, you're also letting somebody else know that that they matter, that their help matters. Standing up for yourself, tracking your accomplishments, I think is really important. I think being able to, sometimes we focus on all the things that aren't going well and that didn't go right, as opposed to the things that are going well and that we did accomplish and the improvements we have made. Allowing yourself to believe that your needs matter is a really important one too. And I think it's also important. Sometimes there are families I've worked with where we have rare disease and the kid is actually pretty, I know this sounds sort of silly, but it has a very difficult diagnosis, but is really entitled. And they learned that. They learned entitlement because everybody's always done things for them because they've been treated like a delicate flower. And then it becomes manipulative. And then it's sort of like, wait a second, here's my child with a rare disease, but I haven't empowered them. And now they expect me to do everything for them. And, that resentment we feel is actually towards ourselves. And that's, another thing that's difficult to recognize. So I think it's important to be able to recognize that to believe that you deserve something, but not that you are necessarily entitled to it. So I think another question that's important to ask yourself is, what do I believe about my child, about my teen, that keeps me from teaching them self-advocacy? What are the things that I believe about my child that makes me believe that I need to advocate for them? How can I incorporate them into that self-advocacy? How can I sort of pass the torch of it? How can I challenge them to be able to do something that's self-advocating that I have been doing? Maybe we start doing it together and then you slowly but surely, do it for them, sort of have them take over the role that you have played, especially when it becomes age appropriate. Is what I believe about my child or my teen based in truth? Or is it based in fear? Is it based in guilt? What might be making me feel this way? What proof do I have to support the limiting belief that I might have? And so what I encourage people to do as well is, for homework, is to each day for 1 week and then hopefully for a month and from each day forward, to challenge yourself to demonstrate, to teach, to practice a self-advocacy skill with your teen, or encouraging them to do that, being able to incorporate self-advocacy into their lives and your lives together, and not from a place of nagging. I think sometimes it feels like we're nagging. This is the hardest thing. Your teen has to come into their own with this diagnosis. I think that we as adults are able to comprehend the significance of a diagnosis in a way that our teens can't. And so we struggle with, well, what are they thinking, or how much should I tell them? And they do have to have their own process. We do have to give them some space and some room to figure it out and recognize how uncomfortable it makes us. We see them uncomfortable. Being a teenager is uncomfortable. Being in the rare disease space, being a human being is uncomfortable. And I think we need to develop more comfort with the discomfort and sit with it and kind of develop a relationship with discomfort as well. And I think that is the hardest part when we talk about medications. And how do I get my kid to take their medications? How do I get them to be responsible about this? And that's a really hard question. And what's challenging is that, you don't want to force it down their throat, but you also want them to take care of themselves. And so I think some of the education really is important. Like, not just that you have to take this medication, but why you have to take this medication, or what the medication is for. So many, as I mentioned before, so many medications have the iatrogenic side effects, which is basically, as you likely know, when you take a medication, there's always a risk involved. Anytime like you take Tylenol or you take Advil, that you can't take it on an empty stomach. Or so all of these drugs, maybe it has drowsiness, maybe it has slowing of processing, all of these different side effects that come from either the rare disease itself or from the medication. And being able to acknowledge that those are very real things, not diminishing the side effects, but really kind of recognizing and educating them about how important it is to be able to know why they're taking the medication. And there's going to be a struggle for sure. And being able to tolerate that and not necessarily get as angry, but come from a place of like really trying to empower them, I think is really important. So I know we have just a few minutes. So I want to introduce Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you. Yes. Hi, everybody. My name's Cheryl Herbert. I'm Vice President of Marketing and Communications at NORD, and I'm actually going to open this up to some Q&A, Rebecca, if we're ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're going to start. We've got a lot of questions. There's been a lot of questions in the chat, and we had a lot of questions from people before the session started. So one of the first questions, very common question, is how do I encourage my teen to talk to a therapist when they refuse to talk about their feelings?
So I think that's a hard thing. And I think that group therapy sometimes for teens can be better than even going to see a therapist. Sometimes therapy for teens can feel punitive, like they already feel like there's something wrong with them, and this just further reinforces that. So if you're able to find, oftentimes there are like groups that meet, even if it's online, but there's also, we have the option with like BetterHelp where they even do texting. Sometimes that can help. So I think being able to encourage it, I often send writing prompts, and I'm happy to share writing prompts with you guys that might be helpful. Yeah.
That's great. Very helpful. Another question is, how do you answer heavy and angry questions that you don't have answers to? Like, why was I born this way?
So I think that you have to be completely honest and just say, and the anger, you have to say, I feel, I completely agree with you. I can't even imagine. And I feel angry for you and with you too. And it is so unfair. You have to validate those feelings. I mean, I'll tell you that there's a woman that I presented with some time ago who's a rabbi actually. And she was talking about how, how often people say, why me? Why me? And her approach was, why not you? Why not me? And that's something that, you know, obviously as an adult is much easier to process. But I think being able to validate their feelings, because there isn't anything that you can say that's going to change the circumstances. And being able to validate their feeling angry, of course, it is unfair and it's okay to feel that.
So we have only a minute left, but one question we have is how do you help with intrusive thoughts? How do you help your teen that might have intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, so intrusive thoughts are, I mean, that's a, you know, can be a mental health related disorder. Anxiety, depression is ruminatory generally. Most people who have depression have ruminatory thoughts about the past, or they have anxiety, which is ruminatory thoughts about the future. This is where the being present and the mindfulness stuff is really important. With teens, I oftentimes use distraction exercises. There's one of the things that I keep handy, and of course I'm not going to be able to find it because I have putties everywhere. I have, and it just fell on the ground and I don't see well, so I'm not going to try to find it, but I use putty oftentimes to help me be able to channel some of my, you know, stress and anxiety. I used to be a nail biter and picker. The other thing is there's a game that I love to play that's, somebody calls it the celebrity game. I call it the locations game. I love geography. So you start immediately with the alphabet, starting with A. Any geographical location. It could be a place, it can be a lake, it can be in anything. Okay, A is for Alabama. That ends in an A. Okay, so I have an A again. Arkansas, that ends in an S. South Africa, another A. And so then you keep going. And sometimes people do it with celebrities, they do it with sports teams, they do it with animals, they do it with, you know, any number of different things. Sometimes I have people do, when you have that ruminatory thinking, we want to try to disrupt that. The sooner you're able to recognize that I'm going down that rabbit hole, the other thing I do is I say, okay, for the next minute, I need you to identify everything in this room that's red. And you look around, or green, or yellow, or blue. The other thing that I have people sometimes do, and this is when you're with someone, is like immediately they come in and they're having these ruminatory thoughts, and we go into a laughing spell. Ah! It looks ridiculous. It looks absolutely crazy, right? But it's a way of disrupting that process, that psychology of just kind of falling down that rabbit hole. Hope that helps.
Very helpful. I think we can all probably relate to that and could maybe use that ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, we're at time, and I just want to thank Rebecca. We have a lot more questions, and at NORD, I just want to say, Rebecca, as everybody saw today here, she's a dynamic human. She's an author, psychotherapist, an athlete, a rare disease advocate, disability rights advocate, and we hope that this is just the beginning of the conversations we're going to be having on the topic of mental health. And Rebecca brought an incredible lens today as somebody who is not just a mental health professional, but comes with a background as a child that was a child with a rare disease, an adult with a rare disease, and found this really helpful, Rebecca. So thank you so much to you and to the Usher Syndrome Society and to the Usher Syndrome Coalition for all your time tonight. Like I said, NORD hopes and understands that that this is a topic that we have only scratched the surface on. I'm a rare disease mom myself, and I could sit here and listen to Rebecca for hours. So thank you everybody for your time tonight. We know this is an important topic, and we are exploring other ways and hope to be coming back to you on this topic. So happy Rare Disease Day to everyone. We're going to be sending a recording out to you along with resources to help you with this topic. And just know that you're not alone. You're doing the best you can. And we're here cheering you on. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so very much.